Thanks everyone for having me here tonight. Thanks Eleni for putting this on. I met Eleni in Albury-Wodonga last year where she came and spoke at an eating disorder luncheon, and she was wonderful, and our friendship has continued. I'm also a board member of Australians for Mental Health, and that's a wonderful organisation that's grassroots, community-based, and we want to change the way mental health is perceived in the community and get the politicians to listen, because mental health has 1/3 of the amount spent on it that physical health gets. So 1/3, if you break your arm, break your leg, fall over with a heart attack, you'll be picked up and looked after beautifully. If you're not very well mentally, you don't do so well. So that's me. This story I'm about to recount it happened in Albury. I don't know if anyone knows where Albury is, Albury-Wodonga, on the border of New South Wales and Victoria. When Mary, she died when she was 15 and a half, but when she first got sick, she was about 12. I was Mayor of Albury at the time, and after that term I gave up and helped care for Mary, but she lasted 3 years. So I'll tell this story. A warm welcome to John Brogden, who's just walked in too. John, good to see you. So here goes. It'll take about 10 minutes, and if I struggle at times, bear with me. I would like to start this story by recounting an incident which occurred 3 weeks before Mary took her own life. Annette phoned me at work to say that Mary had a dressage lesson booked in at Ashby's Undercover Arena out near Howlong, and that Shireen, Mary's horse mother and companion, was detained at work and couldn't take her. Mary was very keen to take the lesson, as the woman instructor only came to Albury once or twice a year. After a bit of a rush and with a borrowed horse float, Mary, Cyrano and I made it to the property in time for the lesson, and we proceeded to get Cyrano saddled and ready. Cyrano was loosely tethered to the horse float, and Mary was in close adjusting his gear when he inexplicably reared to his full height, and his hooves came crashing down inches away from Mary and where her head would have been if I hadn't been able to shove her aside. Mary was calm. Cyrano had never done anything like that before, and my heart was hammering at the close call. It could very well have been one of those tragic horse accidents we hear about sometimes. 3 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, I had gone to work early for a sales meeting. After it finished, I returned to my office on Young Street, where, on arriving, Lloyd announced there'd been a suicide at the freeway and traffic was crawling in the southbound lanes. I felt instant fear and sickness, and I walked outside as I dialed Annette to make sure Mary was still in bed, as she was to have a day off school. She wasn't there. As Annette frantically ran out to her car, a police car was turning into our driveway. Our lives would never be the same, and our youngest child and only daughter Mary was dead. She was 15 and a half years old. Almost 3 years to the day before Mary ultimately ended her own life, and in her first year of high school, Mary became ill. She'd been having ongoing concerns with a tooth infection, and during this she came down with a severe virus and she lost a lot of weight. Usually when your child is sick, you care for them as best you can. Wait out the worst, and the first sign of getting better is when they want something to eat. Mary didn't get better, and she didn't ever eat again, unaided or unsupervised. Somewhere between the tooth infection and the virus, Mary had developed an eating disorder. I could go on about Mary's professional care and the successes and failures along the way, but I won't dwell on those. Suffice to say, through my experience, I now understand superior mental health care leads to better outcomes. What I would like to relate is the unrelenting pain encountered by the family and the sufferer with an eating disorder. Your entire day revolves around the feeding. Every morning we would sit with Mary while she ate her breakfast, passively and compliantly, but unless Annette or I prepared her breakfast and watched while she ate, she simply could not and would not. This was the same with morning tea, lunch and afternoon tea at school. One of us would drive to the school and park unobtrusively as possible as Mary made what must have been a demeaning walk to our car to sit inside while she ate those meals. I feel so sad about anyone with an eating disorder with regard to their dignity, as all mental illnesses bring their own stigma and shame, but to me the eating disorder magnifies this. The courage endured by sufferers is remarkable, and they would dearly love to get well. As a family, we just wanted to return to normal. Mary had an eating disorder and depression. The depression she was able to hide, but the one stark statistic relating to eating disorders that I didn't know until earlier this year is that 1 in every 5 people with an eating disorder will die by suicide, and it has the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. We decided to hold Mary's funeral at QE2 Square, a public place, where anyone who wished to attend would be able to, especially kids, as I had noticed that whenever anything terrible happened, they were often excluded or were the last to arrive to a crowded church. We also wanted to honour her memory with the dignity she deserved, openly and honestly. Some local media outlets had politely approached us through a third party to ask if we minded if they attended, and we gave our permission. The day after the funeral was the worst day since the day Mary had died. We had somehow survived the week until the funeral, probably on adrenaline and out of necessity to organise the service. But the day after, we woke to read the paper and see the 4 of us in our raw grief on the front page. The story was very good journalistically. However, we were tired and fragile and just as low and flat as I have ever been. But a platform had been laid. About 15 months after Mary had died, Jodie O'Sullivan, a family friend, Mary's dressage instructor and the features editor of the Border Mail, approached us on behalf of her editor, Heath Harrison, to see if the 2 of them could come to our home to talk to us about an idea. As a newsroom, they'd been talking about doing something real about suicide for almost 2 years. They were concerned about the suicides that frequently occurred in our region and news of which filtered through their office, but they didn't report them as they had been warned by health authorities that to do so had the potential to trigger copycat responses. Encouraged by changes to the Australian Press Council's guidelines on reporting suicide, Heath and Jodie came to talk and see if we were prepared to feature in the Ending the Suicide Silence campaign. With some reluctance, we agreed, but we did point out we were putting a lot of faith in the paper and it would need to be a campaign handled with dignity and compassion. Annette, who's down there, told them very directly, "We are trusting you, don't stuff it up." In the early hours of Saturday, August the 4th, 2012, Heath Harrison lay in bed waiting for the thump of the newspaper on his driveway, an edition he believed was the most important in his 15 years at the paper. It was a 4-page wraparound with our story, a feature by Patrick McGorry, and a promise of a week-long examination of suicide and mental illness. We waited with trepidation too, as we had managed to get through the first 15 months, and this would just inflame the uneasy equilibrium we'd been enduring. The fear that starting a conversation about suicide and mental health would result in a deafening silence was unfounded, and as more stories were told with sensitivity and compassion, there was an outpouring of community goodwill. The butterfly campaign to secure a headspace has been well documented. That's at home in Albury. After Mary's death, the paper put a motif of butterflies there, and people collected them. We took them to Canberra to the health minister, and shortly after we ended up being awarded a headspace in Albury-Wodonga, which is a wonderful thing for the 12 to 25-year-olds. So, sorry, I'll start again. The butterfly campaign to secure a headspace has been well documented, but I believe the 54 news leads and 12 front pages over a period of weeks and months, and periodical stories since, has had a far-reaching impact on our community with regard to acceptance and understanding of mental illness and suicide. After the Ending the Silence campaign, we sometimes received letters or phone calls, or someone would call into my work for a quiet chat, and the topic was mental illness or grief related to suicide. Often I would organise for them to phone or meet my wife Annette, who is the world's best listener, and she would talk and listen. Annette was finding out firsthand that many people left behind after a suicide of a loved one were carrying a heavy burden of a type of grief that not many people could or would speak to them about, so that they were often stuck in one spot on their journey of grief, and they couldn't move forward. Annette knew that something needed to occur to acknowledge those left behind after the suicide of a loved one, and she has always placed a great deal of emphasis on the shortest day and the longest night of the year. Not only because it is one day some of the time, and it's 2 days most of the time before our eldest son Jack's birthday, and after that the days gradually become longer and lighter. The longest night has always been a symbol of renewal and hope for a brighter future. And with this in mind, Annette and I, as her understudy, set about creating Survivors of Suicide and Friends and planning for our first Solstice evening to be held at Albury's QE2 Square on the Solstice Eve, the 21st of June 2013. About 1,000 people braved the icy cold starlit night to listen to Archie Roach sing We Won't Cry, and to hear amazing keynote speakers such as 2010 Australian of the Year Patrick McGorry and the CEO of Suicide Prevention Australia, Sue Murray, as the crowd stood or sat around fire pits for warmth and comfort. The evening wasn't sombre at all, and the community spirit and goodwill was almost tangible. In June this year, it was our 6th Solstice evening, and preparations are already underway for next year's. So far we have 2 speakers nailed down. Still a secret, but at least we've got them, and Annette and I spend half our existence trying to find suitable speakers. We know that almost 3,000 Australians each year take their own lives, and we also know that suicide is the biggest killer of our youth in the 18 to 24 age group. But we sometimes forget how many friends or sisters or lovers or brothers or parents or grandparents are left behind to try and pick up the pieces. Mary could have been killed 3 weeks before she ultimately ended her life in a tragic horse accident, and we would have been just as devastated by her death. I would still have read her major Year 9 English assignment titled Out of the Shadows, exploring the topic of mental health, which we read for the first time after her death. I would still have read these sentences. People are constantly suffering sadness and pain in the form of grief, hardship, and illness. Speaking of illnesses in particular, it is often mistaken that mental illnesses are just a stage that is soon the distant past. Too often, it is not. Depression causes a poor quality of life and can haunt a person for extreme lengths of time, sometimes never ending or becoming so severe the sufferer no longer desires to live. It is not something anyone should have to encounter, but it is a topic that cannot be avoided because sadly, it is all too common. But I would not have known the truth, and for the truth and for the privilege of sharing another 3 weeks with our beloved Mary, I am eternally grateful for that. In concluding, I would like to say we all have a part to play in looking out for and supporting our friends and those close to us with their mental health. Mary didn't ever speak about her depression or her darkest thoughts, and I so wish she had been able to. If you notice a close friend or family member is becoming withdrawn or struggling, ask them how they are and truly listen to their answer. It might not be you who elicits a response, or the next person, or the one after that, but by caring and asking and listening, eventually, as in the following quote by Jacob Rees, someone may get a life-saving response. And I'll just finish with this quote. When nothing seems to help, I go and look at the stonecutter, hammering away at his rock, perhaps 100 times, without so much as a crack showing in it. Yet at the 101st blow, it will split in two, and I know it was not that blow that did it, but all that had gone before. Thank you.